Hello, my name is Zoe Baker and I'm an Academic Skills Advisor at the Skills Centre. So in this screencast, I will be providing some tips, advice and information on levelling up to your undergraduate studies in terms of study skills. So this screencast is ideal if you are new to university or are returning after a break, as it will provide a useful refresher. So as an introduction, we're going to look at what do good writing skills actually look like. So when we say good writing skills, what do we mean? We're going to talk about writing critically, about effective paragraph structure, and also about style and register. And we will define what these mean as well. So it's useful to reflect at this stage before we begin. What do you feel confident in already in terms of these skills? So in terms of writing critically, effective paragraph structure, and style and register. And also, what do you feel that you need to develop as well? If you're unsure, I'd encourage you to take the skills check. So this is available at the link at the bottom of the screen. So this is a quick 10-minute questionnaire where you can rate your confidence in different academic study skills. So it's not a test, it's just simply rating how confident you feel with each of the areas. And at the end, it will show you what workshops or webinars, because we're running them as webinars now, you can take to improve your confidence in the areas where you've rated yourself as having low confidence. So it's useful to start with asking the question of what do markers expect from my work at university level? So here is a summary just to get an understanding around that. So they expect clear writing that is easy to follow. The sentences should make sense. Your writing should be free of errors, so in terms of spelling and grammar errors. It should be critical, and this term is used a lot at university, so you will hear the phrase write critically or think critically. So critical writing avoids just describing information. It's expressing why your points are important and explaining what they imply. And it's about using evidence, so journal article, books, different sources to evidence your points as well. And finally, they expect you to use an appropriate style. So what we mean by this is an appropriate academic style. So using a more formal register, so not using colloquial or everyday speech in your writing, and adhering to particular writing do's and don'ts. So all of these points on this slide, we're going to cover step by step in this screencast. So we're going to start off by talking about clear writing. So what do we mean by clear writing and how can we achieve clear writing in our academic work? So firstly, I want to point out the importance of planning your assignments. So there are some quick tips for assignment planning here. So firstly, understand what the question is asking for. Asking, what do I know about this topic already, and noting those ideas down. Then revisit and build on your knowledge. So add these new ideas to your plan. So by revisiting your knowledge, what I mean is going through your lesson content on Blackboard, going through any previous PowerPoints from seminars and lectures, any recommended reading on your modules, and having a look at those and adding any new relevant ideas to your assignment plan. And also asking what literature evidences or discusses these ideas. So ask yourself whilst reading, how is this reading relevant to my assignment? What is my purpose for reading this particular book chapter or journal article, whatever it is that you're reading? Now, what I've presented here is a very quick bite-sized rundown of tips for assignment planning. As I stated, these are just quick tips, but if you want to have a look at a more in-depth guide, do take a look at the link at the bottom of this slide. So we have an online study guide on planning and structuring assignments available, and it goes through each of these tips in a lot more depth. So as I've mentioned literature in the previous slide, it's really useful to spend some time familiarising yourself with how to search for literature on the university's library gateway. So the link provided here will take you to a step-by-step guide on how to search for literature, which you will need to do when planning your assignment. So why is it so important to plan an assignment? So it's very easy for your marker to tell whether an assignment has been planned or not. It can impact on the quality of your work quite dramatically. So the telltale signs of an unplanned assignment are showed in the left column of this slide, so in that red column. These features of writing arise from not creating a plan, as we're trying to retrieve various topics and ideas from memory as we're writing, and this can get really confusing and lead to an absence of structure. It can lead to inconsistencies in the way that your material is ordered. It can lead to unsupported points and a narrow selection of literature. So it may result in you using the same couple of journal articles repeatedly throughout instead of finding a variation of different journal articles and book chapters or other sources of reading as well. So a planned assignment, on the other hand, is very clear, and this is shown on the right-hand side of this slide in green. So in a planned assignment, it's structured well, the language is clear, the reader can quickly and easily understand the points you're making, and understandably this leads to a higher quality assignment overall. The marker needs to understand the points that you're mentioning so they can award marks for them, and planning an assignment is a good way to ensure that you're writing clearly throughout and that it flows really nicely as well. So you might wish to pause this screencast now and just take a good look through this table to get a good understanding of what the signs of an unplanned assignment are and what the signs of a planned assignment are. So next we're coming on to critical writing. So as I mentioned before at the start of this screencast, you will hear the phrases write critically or think critically repeatedly whilst you're at university. So what does it actually mean? So in order to be critical, we need to ask questions. Being critical is all about not taking things at face value. So it's questioning assumptions. It's looking for alternative explanations. So if you read something and somebody has proposed a particular point of view, it's actually asking, does everyone agree with this? And going and finding alternative explanations for that. It's also looking for weaknesses, gaps or flaws in arguments. Though I do want to clarify, it's not only about looking for weaknesses, but also looking for strengths as well in different pieces of evidence and work. Ultimately, questioning is at the core of critical thinking. So as long as you're questioning what you're reading, then you are reading and thinking critically. So not taking anything for granted at all. It's about asking, why is this important? And we also ask the so what question. So when we're reading some information, thinking, so what? Why is this important? Why is this important to the assignment I'm writing? Why is this important to my argument? Why is this important to my topic? And you get the idea. It's about questioning. Now there are lots of different ways to be critical. Now I have given a flavour on this slide, but there are many more different ways we can think and write critically. So if you take a look at our study guide on critical writing, which is linked at the bottom, there are a list of different ways that we can be critical on there. So definitely take a look at that as it is very useful. So now that we have an understanding of what critical thinking is, and have an insight into what critical writing involves, I want to show you a step-by-step guide in how to integrate criticality into paragraph structure. So this table that is present on the screen now is an ideal paragraph structure that incorporates evidence and criticality. So main body paragraphs, those are the paragraphs that are not the introduction or not the conclusion, should follow this template. So you may have heard of the phrase point, evidence, explain before. It's essentially the same thing. So in following this template, you're demonstrating clear critical writing which uses evidence to support claims. So this will help you to meet various assignment marking criteria, such as a clear structure, writing clearly, being concise, using relevant evidence. It's also really useful to ensure that you remain on point, and it reduces the risk of going on writing tangents that can really eat up your word counts. So just as a step-by-step guide, we start with a topic sentence. A topic sentence should be the first sentence of your paragraph, and this introduces the main point of that paragraph. So as a rule, each paragraph should cover one point or one topic. It shouldn't include more than one key point, as this is where it gets very confusing and hard for the reader to follow. Then following that, we provide evidence for that point that's evidenced in our topic sentence. So this might sound like Taylor supports this view by suggesting that, or according to Slater. This is where we bring in our references that support the first sentence, our topic sentence of our paragraph. And then finally, the last part, represented in blue at the bottom, is the evaluation. This is where we're being critical. So this involves of reflecting back on that evidence, what we've written about, and asking the so what question, or the why is this important question. So why is it important that Jones has demonstrated this point? Or why is it important that Slater has suggested this? And then articulating that in our writing to the reader. A nice way to remember this structure is by thinking of it in terms of 3 different voices. So the first part, the topic sentence, is our tour guide voice. This informs the reader where you're taking them, so the reader should be able to tell from the very first sentence of your paragraph what the main point or topic of that paragraph will be. Remember, we said that one paragraph should just be one point. Then the expert voice comes next. This is where you bring in the voices of the experts to support the point that you've mentioned in your tour guide voice. And then finally, the critical voice at the bottom here in blue is where we reflect back on that evidence, as I said before, reflecting back on that expert voice and asking, so what? Why is this important? Also thinking, why is this important to my assignment question? Often the so what will seem very obvious to you, and you might feel that the reader should know what is implied already. But never assume that the reader will know what you're implying or getting at. Imagine that you're writing for a reader that knows absolutely nothing about the topic, as this will force you to always include that critical voice, or at least remind you to include that critical voice. It's worth noting that a trap that some students fall into here is that they include the tour guide voice at the top, and then they include the expert voice, and then move on to a new paragraph. They'll stop and move on to a new paragraph before bringing in the critical voice. And then often they will get feedback on their assignment saying, you're not being critical enough and you need to be more critical. And what that means is they've missed the last part of this off here. They've missed this critical voice. So critical writing is required for the higher grade classifications. So when you get set an assignment, you will be given marking criteria. It's a matrix, it's often called. And on the higher end of that document will always state things such as demonstrates criticality, a good level of criticality, or an excellent level of criticality. And this is asking for this part, this bottom critical voice on your paragraphs to be incorporated. Some students find it useful to have this open or printed out, this particular slide, just to guide them when they're writing their paragraphs. And some students also will write tour guide expert critical on their Word document and then populate the text underneath it. So they will write tour guide voice and write out their topic sentence, then expert voice, then write out the references to the literature, and then critical voice and include their critical point. If when you get to the critical voice you're a bit confused or unsure of how to be critical about the expert voice, if you go back to the previous slide and have a look at our study guide online of our critical writing techniques and tips, it does have a list on there, as I've mentioned before, of all of the different ways you can be critical. So that's useful to look at for some inspiration. So what I'm showing now is an example paragraph. And as I've mentioned, you can of course have the 3 voices template with you when you write your next assignments to guide you. But it is also important to be able to identify the 3 voices in writing so that you can check your own work before you submit it, so that you can read through your paragraphs and just ensure that you have the tour guide, the expert and the critical voice there. So what would be useful to do is to pause at this point on the screencast and take a look to see if you can identify the 3 voices in this paragraph. So where does the tour guide voice end? Where does the expert voice start and end? And finally, where is the critical voice in this paragraph? So hopefully that you've paused and you've taken a look at that and have some ideas about where the tour guide, the expert and the critical voice is in this paragraph. I'm going to reveal the answers now, so if you haven't paused, please do so now. This is the last chance, and then you can identify them and see the answers on the next slide. So here is the same paragraph that has been colour-coded with the tour guide, the expert and the critical voice. So the tour guide is shown in orange at the top there. Age has been shown to play an important role in the likelihood of engaging with false information online. Then we've got the expert voice following on from that. We know that as it starts to talk about evidence. And so it starts in their study exploring behavioural data on Facebook in the US, Guess et al., and it goes on to describe another piece of evidence later on, which is Lee 2018. And then we have this critical point in blue following this, where the writer has reflected back on the expert voice, which is in green, and asked, so what? Why is this important? What could this imply? And has asked these different critical questions to then make a point here. So through this questioning, they've provided some reasons as to why Guess et al. Found that Americans over the age of 65 shared more fake news than younger people. And they've provided a suggestion of why those aged 60 and over have been shown to be more susceptible to being victims of phishing and other types of cyber scams. As they've stated, this could potentially be explained by lower levels of digital media literacy amongst older populations, resulting in higher levels of trust of online information. They've also gone on to provide an answer to another way that you can be critical, which is asking, what next? What can we do about this? And they've suggested there that educational resources need to be developed for this age group in engaging with information online. As a quick reminder, as long as you are questioning the evidence or the expert voice, and then articulating that in the critical voice, you are being critical in your writing. So develop a questioning mindset of the different pieces of evidence and information that you see when you're writing your assignments. So now that we have a good idea of how to approach our assignments, so writing clearly and the importance of planning, as well as how to write critically and follow a critical paragraph structure, there is still the remaining question of how we write up our ideas. How do we find the right words to use? And how do we make our writing sound academic? So while studying at university, you might hear the phrases academic style or academic tone. People may say you need to write academically. Now, what does this mean exactly? So in order to write in an academic style or an academic tone, it means the kinds of words that you use and how you express your ideas with those words. So it's your vocabulary choices and the accuracy of that vocabulary in your writing. And academic writing mainly uses the formal register. So it sounds a lot more formal as opposed to everyday language, which is quite colloquial or chatty. A really useful resource to get an understanding of academic words and phrases is the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank. So this is linked at the bottom here. It's really useful to have this open as you're writing your assignments, as it includes so many starter sentences and different phrases and words that you can use that are academic in style and tone. Over the next 2 slides, I'm going to introduce you to some basic rules of academic writing, which can help you accomplish the appropriate style and tone. So as some basic rules for academic writing, we have the rule on the left-hand side of this column, and then some do nots in the middle, and then do's on the right-hand side. So on the left is the rule. The first one is to avoid conversational language and colloquial expressions. So I mentioned on the previous slide how academic writing sounds a bit more formal. So the solution for this is to use more formal language. And the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank that I mentioned can help you get to grips with that and introduce you to some different ideas of the different words that you can use and phrases you can use. So in the do not column, we have a couple of examples. So kids in education today. That sounds a bit informal, it's quite chatty. It's what we would say in a conversation with some friends. But in the do column, we have a reworked version of that. So instead of saying kids in education today, if we're writing an assignment, we can write pupils in the contemporary education system. And the second example is to don't shorten words, so use contractions. So these are words such as don't or can't or won't or haven't. This can be quite a difficult habit to get out of, but just be conscious of it whilst you're writing. We need to write our words in their full form, so do not, cannot, will not, have not. It's really useful before you submit your assignment to really double check it to make sure that don't, can't, won't, haven't slipped through into your writing. I have linked here at the bottom to one of our online study guides on academic writing, which includes some more examples of these, but I do have some more examples on this slide. So another rule is to not be vague. So don't be vague and non-specific in your writing. So give specific details such as quantities, numbers and names. So in the first example on this, I have lots of people are writing about this topic in the do not column. What we should really be writing is references in there to show the reader that lots of people definitely are writing about this. We need to show them that this is true. So we may write several scholars have written about this topic and then provide the references here. Just as a tip, I've used a semicolon in between multiple references here, and this is a really useful technique as it prevents you from describing, for instance, exactly what Brown has said, exactly what Campbell has said, because that will just eat up the word count and you'll use a lot of your words just describing what these different authors have said. You can represent a shared idea spread across multiple different sources by putting them all together separated by a semicolon. As we've mentioned quantities and numbers as well in the rule, another example is in the do not column, many older people have diabetes. If that was written in your assignment, the marker would be asking, well, what is your evidence of this? Exactly how many older people have diabetes? So in the do column, what we can write in our assignment is, according to statistics, 26% of people aged 60 to 69 in England have diabetes, and that's reference to a source there. So we're telling the reader exactly the percentage of older people that have diabetes and what age range this involves as well. The final academic writing tip I'm going to show you, as just the basics of academic writing, is to avoid repeating the same words or variations of them in the same sentence. So the solution is to pay extra attention to your vocabulary when proofreading. So in the do not column, we have an example which repeats some words. So it states, however, although Davis 2007 argues that genetics are crucial in personality development, Jones 2011 argues that environmental influences are just as crucial. So we have two repeated words there. Crucial is repeated twice and argues is repeated twice. So it sounds quite repetitive. Other than that, this example is absolutely fine, but we just need to change these words up a little bit. So in the do column, I've integrated some synonyms here. So different words that mean the same thing. So now it states, although Davis argues that genetics are crucial in personality development, Jones contends that environmental influences are just as important. So I've changed the second argues to contends, and I've changed the second crucial to important. So when we're talking about writing academically, I want to state a very important point to consider. While it's important to avoid making your writing sound more complicated than it needs to be, academic writing is not about using overly complex or flowery language to explain something. So we do need to make it sound a bit more formal, but we're not going too far into complexity so that it no longer makes sense. Good academic writing explains complex ideas clearly in a way that is easy to follow and to understand. So someone who has never studied your subject or the topic you are writing about should be able to easily follow your writing, and that's a good way to test yourself on the clarity of your writing. So just to add to this, sometimes students will right-click on a word in Microsoft Word and go to synonyms and then pick a word that sounds overly complicated on a lot of the words to try and make their writing sound more academic. However, this doesn't really make it sound more academic. Instead, it just makes it sound more complicated and it's really hard to understand for the reader. So a really good resource is you can use a thesaurus, but just be sure that you're not making your language too complex so that it no longer makes sense. And also the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank that I've mentioned on a previous slide is also very useful for accomplishing academic tone and style whilst remaining clear. So that concludes this screencast, but over the next couple of slides I just want to quickly show you some useful resources. So on this slide we have some various references to books that are relevant to the content that we've covered in this screencast. There is a link to the Hemingway app which is useful to improve your grammar, so it checks your grammar in passages of writing. And we also have another online study guide for starting at university that you might find helpful. This is a reminder to take the skills check that I mentioned on an earlier slide. So it's very useful to understand where you're most confident and where you need to develop your skills further, and it will provide you with personalised recommendations on what workshops or, as I stated before, webinars are useful for you to attend, and it will link you to some resources as well. Finally, this is a collection of the other support that we offer. We can be contacted on our email address here, skillscentre@shu.ac.uk. We also have a Twitter page, so do give us a follow at Hallam Skills, and take a look at our website as well, which is at blogs.shu.ac.uk/skillscentre.